The Foreign Relations Committee, the United States Senate will come to order. Welcome, everyone. We have a good hearing this morning on a very important issue. Some great witnesses to testify, and I'm sure we're going to have a spirited discussion on this. To those of you who've joined us this morning, thank you so much. This is an open hearing. We're always glad to have you, come and watch the proceedings, but not participate. As everyone knows, we have a zero tolerance on any attempt to either contact or influence anybody at the dais or the witnesses, and the usual rules will apply. You'll be immediately arrested, removed, and banned from the committee for a year. So hope we don't have to do that. It's only been a rare occasion we have, and that's a good thing. So with that, today we're going to talk about arms control. And I want to thank our witnesses, Mr. Billingsley and Ms. Gottmiller, for being here today to discuss what could be defined as one of the most existential issues of our time. Both of you have been doing this for a long time and have advised us on both sides of the dais here on this issue. America is currently experiencing an unprecedented increase in the nuclear threat posed by our adversaries around the world. For the first time in our history, we faced two peer nuclear powers in both Russia and China, but also threats from multiple smaller, unstable nuclear powers like North Korea and aspiring nuclear powers like Iran. While it has suspended its New START obligations and continues to test and develop nuclear weapons, Russia's nuclear triad of ICBMs, SLBMs, and nuclear-capable strategic bombers is nearing full modernization. For years, Russia has consistently failed to comply with nuclear agreements and instead uses arms control talks to constrain U.S. policy towards Russia and pursue concessions on issues far beyond just nuclear weapons. It used this strategy successfully on President Obama with New START. It used it on Biden in the strategic stability dialogue in the lead up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Russia tried and failed to pull the same tricks on the Trump administration. We can be sure the Russians will try again, endangering the safety of the American people and further eroding global stability. Meanwhile, China is in the midst of a dramatic nuclear buildup and has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal of any nuclear-armed state. And while China races to nuclear parity with the U.S., it shows little to no interest in arms control talks. But as troubling as these developments from Russia and China are, we cannot take our eye off rogue states with nuclear ambitions. Fortunately, President Trump took action to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities earlier this year. By doing so, he prevented a dangerous, ideologically driven Islamic autocracy from acquiring a nuclear weapon that could threaten the U.S., Israel, and others around the world. But the Iranian regime won't stop there, and we need to stay vigilant. Like his neighbor in China, Kim Jong-un has repeatedly rejected talks on denuclearization, even as he pursues a full-scale expansion of North Korean nuclear strike capabilities. More concerningly, in return for North Korea's direct support for Russia's war in Ukraine, Russia is likely providing technical expertise on advanced space and military capabilities that will boost North Korea's nuclear ambitions. To quote the Congressional Commission on the Strategic Posture of the United States, on which both of our witnesses have served, we are in a, quote, decisive decade, end quote, in regards to our nuclear future. Let's be crystal clear. The Cold War nuclear arms control paradigm is dead. Our adversaries have ensured this outcome. In this decade, we will have no choice but to confront the reality that the old arms control architecture is gone, constrains our nuclear arsenal, and allows Russia and China to exploit our goodwill. As President Trump has said many times, our goal is peace through strength. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. simply extended existing nuclear agreements like New START without attempting to improve them or even enforce them, only to have Russia suspend its commitments after invading Ukraine. With New START expiring in February, we must seize this once-in-a-generation opportunity to lead on any new arms control negotiations with Russia. It's time to move beyond blind faith in Putin and take the reins on our nuclear future. To counter China, we must modernize and rebuild our nuclear arsenal. For far too long, underinvestment in our nuclear triad has only created greater insecurity. It is time we modernize the triad and reestablish a strong, credible deterrent. Mr. Billingsley, Ms. Gottmiller, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can take on this decisive decade, as you have called it, and shape it to protect this and future generations from the nuclear aggression of our competitors. With that, I'll refer to the distinguished ranking members. Senator Sheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to both of our witnesses today. Thank you both for being here. This hearing, as you know, comes at a moment when nuclear risks are rising on several fronts. Russia's modernizing its arsenal with unconventional delivery vehicles. China's seeking to triple its warheads over the next 10 years. North Korea and Iran continue to present a dangerous threat. And these challenges are converging as the New START Treaty, the last legal restriction on Russian nuclear weapons, is about to expire. Across both parties, there are leaders who recognize the gravity of this moment. That includes President Trump, who has a long track record of concern about nuclear war. Despite his recent comments, he called nuclear war the ultimate catastrophe as far back as 1990. Sorry, not 1900. This year, as President Trump said, and I quote, "There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many." I think the real question is, how do we reduce the nuclear threat without handing strategic advantage to Russia or China? Restarting nuclear testing is not the answer, I believe. Simply building more weapons will only trigger another arms race, and even the most expensive missile defense would fail to stop every warhead and destabilize the nuclear balance. The only option with a track record of success in reducing this risk has been arms control. We faced more than 40,000 Russian nuclear weapons at the height of the Cold War. Today, that number has fallen to less than 2,000 deployed strategic warheads. Those reductions were not charity. They were hard-nosed strategic wins for the United States, limiting adversaries' capabilities and increasing our visibility into their programs. And they were achieved with leaders who, like Vladimir Putin today, could not be trusted. That's why verification matters. Arms control, as you both know so well, is not based on trust, but on inspection that protects American interests. We would all sleep better if we were conducting the most advanced, intrusive inspections modern technology allows right now on Russian, Chinese, and Iranian weapons programs. So I hope we will hear you both discuss how we can modernize those inspections and how we can update our own nuclear forces for the challenges ahead. Because today's nuclear environment includes AI-enabled systems, hypersonics, and cyber threats, technologies that shrink decision time and magnify the risk of miscalculation. And none of this matters if America's commitments are not believed. I think Ukraine is the clearest example of that. Some of us remember the Budapest Memorandum, I'm sure both of you do, when Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear arsenal in return for security guarantees. If we allow Russia to swallow sovereign Ukrainian territory, other nations are going to draw the obvious conclusion. They need nuclear weapons to be safe. That is a deterrence failure that we can't afford. That's why we must continue pressing for bilateral nuclear limits, where doing so strengthens U.S. security, even in this period of heightened tension. This requires consistent attention and disciplined leadership. I look forward to hearing from both of you your views on how we meet this challenge and what steps Congress should be thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. We'll hear first from Mr. Marshall Billingsley. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and formerly served as special presidential envoy for arms control during President Trump's first term. In this capacity, he led arms control negotiations on behalf of the U.S. government and worked with allies and partners in both Europe and Asia on the development and deployment of defensive capabilities. Mr. Billingsley.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, Senator McCormick, it's great to be back here in this committee room where I got my start in Washington back in the 1990s as a staffer on this committee. When I last briefed this committee in 2020 in classified session on this topic as the envoy, I provided details on what these two adversaries, Russia and China, were doing. And I discussed many of the problematic things that Russia was pursuing, both with novel weapons and its huge arsenal of treaty-unconstrained theater nuclear weapons. 5 years later, the grim assessment that I gave this committee at the time seems probably to have been overly optimistic. That is to say that China has proceeded at breathtaking pace. If, with permission of the committee, I would ask that my full remarks be included in the record, and I will skip through the threat assessment part of my testimony because you have that there for your perusal. Suffice to say that China is on pace to deploy as many operational nuclear weapons, strategic nuclear weapons, as the United States by 2035, if not sooner. In fact, they're going faster than we previously briefed. They're going faster than the Strategic Posture Commission, which both Secretary Gottmuller and I served on, was briefed. It is alarming. Moreover, the Russians continue to expand their theater nuclear weapons capabilities, which, as I've noted, are not subject to the New START treaty. So what should be done in light of this dangerous turn of affairs? We, for the first time since the dawn of the atomic era, we now will soon face two nuclear peer adversaries who have the potential to engage in either simultaneous, coordinated, or opportunistic aggression against us. A large number of our assumptions and our plans need to change as a result. The Posture Commission, which I fully stand by, it was bipartisan and unanimous in all of its recommendations, recommended a number of things for us to focus on. We saw this coming. And so one of the first things that we recommended is that with urgency, we need to prepare to upload some or all of our nation's hedge warheads. We need to plan to deploy the Sentinel ICBM in a MIRVed configuration. We need to increase the planned number of bombers and long-range standoff ordnance for those bombers. We need to increase the planned production of the Columbia-class SSBNs and their Trident ballistic missile systems. We need to look at fielding a road-mobile ICBM. We need to be prepared to put a portion of our bomber fleet on continuous alert status. We need to develop plans and procedures, and this is crucial, to reconvert the submarine tubes that were filled with cement in order to comply with the New START limitations, and to reintroduce Trident missiles into those tubes. We also are going to have to prepare to keep the Ohio-class submarines operating longer than we planned. What should not be done? What should not be done is an arbitrary political extension of the New START treaty. Many of the measures that I just enumerated, which are supported unanimously by the Posture Commission, are not available to us if we are bound by the New START treaty. For instance, we can't reconvert those Ohio-class submarines. For instance, we can't rewire a third of our B-52 fleet where we stripped out all of the wiring, took the antennas off, took the firing control mechanisms away to denuclearize those platforms. There are so many things that we will be precluded from doing. Just reconversion of those Ohio-class submarines is going to take 2 to 3 years from when we start. Given how long the delays are, how long it takes to get the Ohio-class in, we don't even have the procedures yet available for how to pull that cement out of the submarines. And so another year of living under New START limitations will preclude us from rising to the fast-moving Chinese challenge and the fact that Russia continues to further expand its arsenal. Secondly, New START does nothing with regard to non-strategic theater tactical nuclear weapons, which Russia has an overwhelming number of. More than half the Russian arsenal, probably 60 to 70% of the Russian arsenal, falls into that category and is not treaty constrained. This committee was very clear when it ratified the New START treaty that it expected President Obama to engage the Russians to secure an agreement to rectify this massive disparity in these theater nuclear weapons, but that never happened. Finally, I note that this committee has taken the longstanding position that militarily significant agreements, such as any extension of the New START limitations, should be considered only as a treaty and submitted for advice and consent under the Constitution. In fact, your resolution of ratification is very explicit on this point, where you state, and I quoted in here my testimony somewhere here, but that you expect that anything that extends the mandate would be submitted as a treaty. What can be done in the field of risk reduction and arms control, though, is not negligible. I believe Secretary Gottmuller and I will agree on a number of things. We should continue to operate the nuclear risk reduction centers. We should continue to provide launch warning notifications. We should examine the feasibility of agreeing with the Russians not to impede national technical means. We should, I believe, agree with the Russians, if possible, not to field missile-launched fractional orbital bombardment systems, which are dangerous, destabilizing, decapitating first-strike weapons. So there are things that we can do, but I believe that we need to reset our thought process for arms control, and we need to look at mechanisms that will address the entire Russian arsenal and the Chinese. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms. Gottmiller is a research fellow at Hoover Institute and formerly served as Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security from 2012 to 2016. Prior to this role, she was the Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control, Verification, and Compliance, and she was the Chief Negotiator for New START with the Russian Federation. Ms. Gottmiller, we'd like to hear from you.
Chairman Risch, thank you very much. Ranking Member Shaheen and distinguished members of the committee, good morning to you. It is a distinct honor to testify to you today about the grave challenges facing us in the nuclear realm. This hearing was called to reflect on the advent of an arms race 2.0, and it is indeed a welcome opportunity to explore the fundamentally different nuclear threat environment confronting the United States. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to summarize some key points and place the rest of my testimony on the record. Thank you, sir. I would also like to welcome the presence at this table of a distinguished colleague and counterpart, Marshall Billingsley, with whom I have worked and sometimes sparred for many years. I believe I first encountered Mr. Billingsley when I testified to then-Chairman Jesse Helms before this committee in the 1990s. In 2022-23, we had an important chance to work together on the Strategic Posture Commission of the United States, a congressionally mandated study that brought together eminent colleagues from both sides of the political aisle to examine the increasingly aggressive behaviors of Russia and China over the years since the previous Strategic Posture Commission published its report in 2009. That report had not even touched on China as a strategic threat to the United States. But in ensuing years, the situation has changed dramatically with China's rapid buildup of both conventional and nuclear forces. This dire situation, combined with Russia's aggressive behavior against Ukraine and the United States and its allies, formed the basis of a remarkable consensus among very different members of the bipartisan commission. I was proud to join with my colleagues in approving the final report. The commissioners described the threat during the period covered by the report, 2027 to 2035, in stark terms, Mr. Chairman, to which you have already referred. The United States will face two nuclear peer adversaries for the first time. Today, the United States must make difficult decisions to meet these evolving deterrence requirements, and I welcome this committee's evident willingness to grapple with these critical issues. Your work will be a vital contributor to these efforts. I would like to begin with a few top-line messages. The first step we must undertake is to keep our eye on the prize of our nuclear triad modernization, the program of record, to ensure that it is completed on time and within a predictable budget. These are difficult challenges in themselves, which is why the POR implementation must be a top priority. While we are completing this vital modernization work, we must also be thinking hard and taking steps to address the worst case of a Chinese rush to 1,500 deployed warheads or more, which may happen by 2035. But the decade between now and then gives us ample opportunity to work the problem. Mr. Chairman, you called it a decisive decade, and I agree with you. It gives us time, however, to work the problem. To my mind, the most urgent step is to decide what should be done to respond to President Putin's proposal to extend the limits of New START by 1 year before the treaty goes out of force on February 5, 2026. The new national security strategy points to the value of the President's unconventional diplomacy, which is indeed important and valuable. President Trump can gain an easy win in agreeing with President Putin to extend the limits of the New START treaty by 1 year, but he should do one better. He can improve Putin's offer by proposing that the United States and Russia return to full implementation of the treaty for its remaining time in force. If the two countries are able to exchange data and notifications and conduct on-site inspections, it will ensure that we and they have the most up-to-date information about our respective nuclear triads, in effect providing a real-time status of nuclear forces to the two signatories as the treaty ends. Second, such a one-year extension would not prejudice any of the vital steps that the United States is taking to respond to the Chinese nuclear buildup. We must continue to plan against it and work carefully to determine what capabilities will be needed, including in the realm of uploading warheads. Indeed, the period will buy extra time for preparation without the added challenge of a Russian Federation newly released from New START limitations embarking on a rapid upload campaign. That would not be in the U.S. interest. My bottom line is that it does not serve U.S. national security interests to plan and prepare for the Chinese worst-case scenario while simultaneously facing a rapid Russian upload campaign. The Russians have the capacity and experience to succeed in such a campaign, which we pointed out in the Strategic Posture Commission findings. It will be much better for us to keep them limited for at least another year while we continue to plan and prepare for the Chinese threat. Again, remaining under New START limits for a year does not prejudice planning and preparation to upload. Most importantly, the hiatus will provide President Trump time to pursue his instinct to control nuclear weapons at the negotiating table. The President has already agreed with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping to meet in 2026, and these summits will be a real opportunity for him to strike nuclear deals with his two counterparts in the interest of U.S. national security and in the service of international peace and stability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. We couldn't have two more experienced people in this theater than the two of you. It's always amazed me, and Ms. Gottmiller, I appreciate your observation that we spar back and forth. You and I have done that over the years, but what's always struck me about this particular subject is when we are sparring, we almost never differ on the bottom line of where we're trying to get. Our problem is getting there, and I think a lot of it has to do, our disagreements have to do with the fact of who we're dealing with, and that is Putin, and what we can count on him for or not count on him for. And I'm interested in your suggestion that that New START be continued for an additional year, that it be extended for a year. As you know, I was opposed to it in the start and have all the way along. And I guess my initial inclination is, as we prepared for this hearing, was to obviously not extend it for the year because of all the cheating that Russia has done. And that's the problem I have. I mean, we're doing what we're supposed to do. They won't do what they're supposed to do. And we wind up tying our hands behind our back. And I guess my question to you is, and I'll let you take a run at this also, Mr. Billingsley, why would we do this given the nonsensical approach that Russia has taken to everything when it comes to security? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and indeed, I'm really aware of these compliance problems and violations because as the Assistant Secretary of State, I was responsible for doing the annual compliance report. So it was very much before me at every moment. And so I agree with you that Russia has been a serial violator of a number of treaties. But I really reflect, and it's clear in my longer testimony, I reflect on the history of the first Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which came into force in 1994, the SORT Treaty, which was negotiated by President Bush, and the New START Treaty negotiated by President Obama. When START entered into force in 1994, we had 12,000 deployed warheads on each side. And over the course of these three treaties, we have managed to bring that number down to 1,550 deployed warheads. So the point is that the treaties have played a role, and Russia has abided by these strategic arms reduction treaties with all the problems in other treaty arenas. They have abided by these. It's brought the number of deployed warheads down, and it's kept them under control in this period of a terrible war of aggression in Ukraine. And so I do believe that we have to look carefully. Ronald Reagan said, "Trust but verify." I agree with that. We have to look carefully and watch what they're up to. And if they are abiding by a treaty, as they have complied with START, the SORT Treaty, and New START, then I think that we need to pay attention to that and think then clearly about what's in our national security interests. That's the first and most important issue.
Thank you, Ms. Gottmiller. I wonder, Mr. Billingsley, are you in agreement about the extension with conditions that Ms. Gottmiller has recommended?
Chairman, I would recommend against that for a variety of reasons. First, Russia is a serial treaty violator. They are in violation today, flagrant violation of the New START Treaty. They have precluded on-site inspections and so on and so forth. They are in the process of developing, they're in the process of developing a nuclear weapon to put on orbit in violation of the Outer Space Treaty. They are in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. They've used Novichok as an assassin agent. They're in violation, we believe, of their nuclear testing pledge. We know that they have been doing supercritical tests at their test site in Novaya Zemlya. What we need to do is we need to first determine as a nation what our requirements are for our nuclear arsenal in this rapidly changing and dramatically worsening threat environment. Once you know what the requirements are, you can then move out to negotiate. You know what the parameters are for your negotiations. But we haven't yet done that. The Biden administration did not come to terms with this worsening equilibrium, and this administration has not yet done a nuclear posture review either. So we urgently need that nuclear posture review, which will then help fashion and guide our negotiators for what we want to achieve with regard to the Russians and the Chinese. But if you simply extend the New START Treaty, as Secretary Gottmuller is recommending, what you do is you further postpone all of the other things that I enumerated in my testimony that we urgently need to do, like beginning to reconvert the Ohio-class submarines. We won't be able to do that if we extend New START. You also take all the pressure off the Russians. If you give them another year and we don't address their non-strategic nuclear weapons, they have no incentive to either come to the table on those topics, to come to the table on Skyfall and Poseidon, or to help us get the Chinese into the negotiations. For these reasons, I think it's an ill-advised move at this stage.
Well, thank you. As usual, I find myself on your side rather than Ms. Gottmiller's side, but let's talk about that. By the way, I thought I coined the term serial treaty violator at some time in the past. Thank you for picking that up. It's appropriate. Ms. Gottmiller, one of the things I think we can all agree on is the observation that Mr. Billingsley made at the beginning, and that is, you know, we're sitting here talking about the constraints on these kinds of weapons, but at the same time, there are no constraints on the theater-based weapons. And to me, if anybody was ever inclined to use a nuclear weapon, it would probably be that, as opposed to an intercontinental strike. But yet, there's no constraints on that, and I guess we can't go into in this setting that isn't a classified setting. We can't go into the position of each of the parties and numbers and that sort of thing. But we're not in very good shape in that respect, and so well, one of the things that gets me to the point of where Mr. Billingsley is that we're just spinning our wheels without having constraints. And then, of course, overlying all of this is the fact that Russia is indeed a serial treaty violator. They just don't keep their word. So I'll give you the last shot at it, Ms. Gottmiller.
All right, sir, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I did want to agree with my colleague that the Russians are violating the New START Treaty by seizing implementation. This was determined by the Biden administration. There is not, in fact, any treaty language that would allow them to seize implementation. It's not part of the treaty. But I did want to refer you to the compliance report from 2024 that stated the United States assesses with high confidence that Russia did not engage in any large-scale activity above the treaty limits in 2024. We don't yet have the 2025 compliance report, but I just refer you to that that comment. So what I mean is they are keeping to the warhead limits of New START as far as we
And of course, those limits are only as to deployed warheads.
Deployed warheads, of course. And now I'm coming to your question.
Whatever that means. You know.
Yes, I'm coming to your question about the non-strategic warheads, and I really was very much admiring the move of the Trump administration during his first term in office when President Trump got President Putin to agree to a freeze on all warheads, deployed and non-deployed, strategic and non-strategic. To me, this was a vital first step in a negotiation we all needed to see happen, and that was the one to follow New START. Again, Mr. Billingsley already referred to this. Vladimir Putin wouldn't come to the table, but President Trump, with Mr. Obama, but President Trump then had him coming to the table to talk about this freeze in warheads, which was a vital first step in controlling warheads. And I thought that this really was responding to the top priority we laid out in the resolution of ratification of New START, that we needed to go after the Russian exotic systems and after Russian non-strategic and strategic warheads. So we have that, I think, important precedent laid down. I, for one, hope that the Trump administration will move forward now with restoring that idea of a freeze on warheads with the Putin Kremlin and move forward then to constrain these warheads. It's definitely the next priority for negotiations, and it's one that we all agree on.
Thank you. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gottemiller, you referenced the national security strategy. Were you surprised that it doesn't make more notice of the nuclear threat that we're facing, not just from Russia and China, but also from Iran and North Korea?
Well, ma'am, I really read the national security strategy as being very much focused on regional defense issues, and you can see how it's structured with the focus on the various regions. And so I was a bit surprised, given the President's stated interest in this matter, that they did not cover it a bit more. He did talk on several occasions in the national security strategy about restoring strategic stability with Russia. And so I take that to mean that there is a continuing interest in the Oval Office in moving forward with nuclear negotiations with Russia. But at this time, I must say that they're not yet focusing in their stated documents very much on the nuclear questions. We do have, in addition to the national security strategy, a national defense strategy coming out soon. Perhaps that will say more. Mr. Billingsley's quite right. There's not been a nuclear posture review yet. So I think we just have to see these documents now being prepared and roll out for further details.
You've both negotiated directly with Russia. You've spoken out in support of Ukraine. What do you think the implications are for the nuclear arms race if Russia's allowed to be successful in taking significant territory in Ukraine and not being forced to pay any price, any accountability for what he's done? Mr. Billingsley?
I think we're at a very dangerous inflection point, particularly with regard to the matter of extended deterrence. So the United States has long offered its nuclear umbrella to our allies and our allies. And that's been very, very important to our NATO alliance. It's also been very, very important to our Asian allies. And I think it's essential that we continue to afford that extended deterrent guarantee in order to assure our allies and dissuade them from feeling that they need to move forward with acquisition of their own nuclear capabilities. I'm following the discussion in Poland very, very closely. I find some of what's being said very worrisome. I do not believe in the concept of friendly proliferation. I think that that is inevitably going to lead to the elimination of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a treaty that is in our national interest, in my view, the elimination of the IAEA and the collapse of the safeguards regime, and it will make it much, much harder to constrain countries like Iran if we allow these concerns among allies to then precipitate the acquisition of nuclear weapons. So for this reason, I believe that we ought to, for instance, create a warhead storage area in Poland. We ought to bring Poland into the burden-sharing agreements and provide them with F-35s to join the NATO Nuclear Capability Club as a way of showing them that they are protected and that our umbrella will will continue to watch over them. I think a similar argument can be made with regard to a warhead storage area in South Korea. So these are very complicated matters, but I would very much urge that we continue to emphasize the value of extended deterrence within our alliances.
And Secretary Gottemuller, do you agree with that? And is there not a connection between allowing Ukraine to, or forcing Ukraine to have to give up much of its territory, its ambitions to join NATO, EU, in any negotiated settlement, and the connection to what happens with the nuclear arms race?
Senator Shaheen, I have really long felt that our nuclear negotiations should exist in a realm where we focus on nuclear negotiations in our national interest and think about them in that way. During the period of the Cold War, we had many, many disagreements with the USSR, but still continued to pursue nuclear negotiations in our national interest. So I'd like to state I think they should not be linked together. That's my opinion, but let me state my opinion on what is happening with negotiations in Ukraine. I've been very concerned that there could be some de jure requirement that Ukraine give up its eastern provinces, and I do not believe that that is in anybody's interest, first and foremost the Ukrainians, but it sets a terrible precedent for the future of response to aggression around the world, and I think we need to be clear-eyed about that. Now, de facto, there may be some period of time when Ukraine must see its eastern provinces and Crimea not entirely under its control. But I think about this again with the history of World War II before us, and the Federal Republic of Germany was separated from its eastern provinces for a number of decades until the end of the Cold War, and Germany was reunited. So I think about those precedents when I think about where Ukraine is today, and I do hope and believe that there can be a fair and equitable outcome for Ukraine, including there can be resources laid down for its reconstruction, because it has been suffering from this terrible aggression now for 4 years.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and thank you to both of our expert witnesses. Great testimony. Last week, my colleagues on the committee, Senator Ricketts and Senator Coons, had a very insightful hearing that was focused on countering China's challenge to American AI leadership. One topic that didn't come up during the hearing that I'd like to address today is the integration of AI into all phases of nuclear command and control. AI's evolving role in all phases of strategic arms, from enhanced intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to threat detection and decision support processing. It's likely to have both a positive and I assume negative ramifications for global stability between nuclear weapon states. So let me start with the first question to you, Mr. Billingsley. Given the existential stakes at play, can you both describe Russia and the PRC's posture with regard to AI's integration, at least to the best of your knowledge, and advise the Trump administration how to address this in limitations or verification measures for AI and NC3 negotiations with Moscow and Beijing?
Senator, it is inevitable that AI will, and already is, being integrated into various aspects of the NC3 process, both the intelligence cycle. We are able to do things like coherent change detection now in an automated way that took human analysts peering at changes in imagery weeks sometimes to discover patterns of behavior. The Biden administration, the State Department under the Biden administration promulgated a series of best practices or principles for AI in military matters, which I think, and we actually looked at that, and I believe you and I agreed on this, that it was a prudent set of measures. It basically boiled down to the concept that there needed to always be a human in the loop when it comes to the actual employment of force. I am very concerned about what the Chinese may be doing in particular. My concern is even more heightened because China is moving to a launch on warning posture. And the potential for miscalculation with that posture and the fact that China has none of the risk reduction capabilities or measures that we do have today with the Russians really does create sort of a hair trigger kind of environment which AI, if not controlled fully by humans, could cause real problems.
Thank you. Ms. Gutman, I have a separate question for you. Is there anything you'd like to add to that particular point?
If I may, sir, just one note, and that is that President Biden with Xi Jinping, when they met together in Lima, they did come to the agreement that there should always be a person in the loop, a man in the loop, as Mr. Billingsley said, for nuclear command and control decision-making. And I think that that was an important step forward in beginning to talk about this with our Chinese counterparts, and I do hope that the next phase of diplomacy and negotiation will take us in the direction of fleshing out exactly what that means, because technically it is a difficult matter to sort out. The other thing I would just point to, and I am concerned about it, is that the USSR and the Russian Federation have long had a predilection of doing some automatic decision-making, so to say, in their so-called dead hand system, which is, in theory, a nuclear command and control decision-making system that would enable some launch activity to occur even if there were no people still left alive. And I think that that was and could be a grave danger going forward, and so it's necessary also to engage Moscow on this key issue of keeping a person in the loop for nuclear command and control decision-making.
Great. My other question you just touched on briefly, which is the PRC, and for the most part, they've rebuffed attempts for the U.S. to engage on nuclear arms control and risk reduction, and while initiating a massive buildup. What do you think is going on here? What are their motivations? What, if anything, should the United States be doing to try to get a longer and more productive engagement with China?
Yes, I do agree, sir, and it's been very frustrating both for U.S. negotiators, but also, I think, for U.S. leaders, for U.S. presidents, because the Chinese have been they've obviously been modernizing, obviously been building up, but they haven't been willing to talk about it, and they haven't been willing to discuss or engage in any negotiations. They are very active in multilateral settings, like the Non-Proliferation Treaty Mr. Billingsley referred to, but not on a bilateral basis. I see some signs that this could be changing. I referred to Mr. Biden's ability to meet and agree with Xi Jinping on this NC3 step. That's an important first step. And they also agreed at that time to embark on strategic stability talks, which they were not able then to convene afterwards. But I do believe, based on a number of phenomena, including the fact that President Xi agreed with President Trump to meet 2 times in 2026. This presents some opportunities now for engaging them, and the door seems to be beginning to crack open on engagement. So let us see what we can accomplish. By the way, my own feelings in this regard, I have to admit they are instinctual at this moment, come from being involved in a number of Track 2 discussions with the Chinese when they are beginning to talk now about their rationale for modernization. And we are all concerned about launch under attack, launch on warning, again, as Mr. Billingsley brought up. So I hope that going forward, they will be willing to open up more and talk to us about what their nuclear modernization is all about.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. This is a hearing about arms control, and when we talk about arms control, we typically think of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, things like that. But today, threats can come from a lot of places, and I want to follow up on Senator McCormick. High-tech chips are typically reviewed for export control authorizations by the Commerce Department. Yesterday, the President made an announcement that surprised a number of us about the transfer of NVIDIA H200 chips to China. The details on this are being worked out by the Commerce Department. These chips have a significant national security implication in the way that Senator McCormick mentioned. He is a co-sponsor of a bill that was filed last week by Senators Ricketts and Coons called the Safe Chips Act that would make it very difficult for the United States to transfer chips of this kind. The chips in that legislation are not named by a brand name, but the qualities of those chips that would be subject to significant national security review before transfer laid out in that. I support this legislation that was filed last week. I'm seeking to be added as a co-sponsor. The question that I want to ask each of you is, should the State Department, DOD, and other national security agencies have a greater say in decisions like this, the transfer of high-end chips that could reduce our edge over China, including in very sophisticated national security technology? Why should commerce be taking the lead without the involvement of national security agencies, and should we seek to change that?
Perhaps I'll start, Senator Kaine, and thank you for the question. I come at this having been the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security with responsibility for political military affairs, the Political Military Affairs Bureau being under my aegis. And we did make critical decisions that were related to arms transfers and sales, all the licensing that was done, related to qualitative military edge, for example, in the case of Israel. So I can see a rationale for the State Department as well as the Defense Department being involved in such decision-making when we are concerned about such chips affording a country like China a military edge. So I do see a rationale for that. I will say, sir, that I'm not familiar with the act and the draft legislation that you've discussed, but that is my initial response.
And Mr. Billingsley, but Senator Ricketts, I'm asking questions about your Safe Chips Act that you filed with Senator Coons, and that I would like to be added as a co-sponsor to when you're ready to add co-sponsors. But again, to you, Mr. Billingsley, shouldn't the transfer of technology like this that has such significant national security implications be reviewed by national security agencies and not simply by the Commerce Department?
So, Senator, I'm familiar with the H200 chip, and I just don't, I'm not qualified to speak on that particular matter. I'm looking at Senator Shaheen's senior staffer behind her. He and I worked together for years on when he was on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and I was here in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on this matter of proper jurisdiction for licensing decisions, either on the munitions list via the Department of State or over under the Export Administration Act with the Department of Commerce. And we had in those days often widely differing views with the Clinton administration at the time, also differing views between committees and members of Congress over proper jurisdiction over certain exports. That's a long way of saying, though, that if you believe that a particular technology has direct military applications of significance, then probably the Department of State, in my view, would need to be involved in that process, as well as the Department of Defense.
Well, and I think Senator McCormick laid it out well. AI capacity ties in with nuclear command and control, so it's directly connected to important military technology and U.S. military advantage. One of the things about the report of the transfer of these NVIDIA chips that's complicated is the U.S. has now taken an ownership interest in NVIDIA. The U.S. has said that these particular transfers to China will get a 25% stake in the revenue. So we have a revenue upside to transfer a technology to China, the transfer of which could likely degrade our national security edge over China. There's also been reporting that the CEO of NVIDIA made a large contribution to the construction of the ballroom that's currently being built on the White House. Is this transfer being done out of a financial interest to undercut America's national security posture? I think this is something that we really have to analyze. And the fact that this announcement came sort of out of the blue yesterday after months, obviously, of lobbying by NVIDIA, I think just indicates the wisdom of the Ricketts-Coons legislation and the need for there to be a review of this kind. And the last thing I'll say, Mr. Chair, is we ran into kind of a similar issue during COVID. We had defined national security items in a fairly narrow way, and then suddenly we found that advanced pharmaceutical ingredients or even masks, gloves, and gowns could be a national security item when you really need them. I think advanced chips are definitely a national security item. They're not a nuclear weapon, but they have a huge impact on tomorrow's defense needs in the United States and others, and we may need to broaden the aperture in terms of how we review transfer of some of these technologies. Thank you.
It isn't just nuclear weapons either, virtually, when it comes to the chips. I mean, it's everything. So with that, Senator Ricketts, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our witnesses here today to talk about this really very important issue. Ambassador Billingsley, talk to me a little bit about what is going on with regard to communist China and their buildup of nuclear weapons. My understanding is that they are experiencing nuclear breakout. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Are they seeking to get parity with the United States, or are they seeking to pass us? Do we know?
At a minimum, they're pursuing parity. I personally believe that they intend to surpass us, given the pace at which they're moving.
And this is specifically on the strategic weapons, but what about on the tactical nuclear weapons?
That's an area where I think in closed session more could be discussed, but suffice to say that China has ensured that virtually all of its missile systems, both intermediate range, ballistic, and cruise missiles, are dual capable. So they have built in the functionality to deploy a large number of theater nuclear weapons should they so choose. They were never precluded under the INF Treaty from having these kinds of missiles. We were. Russia cheated, blew up that treaty. We're now finally building these weapons, but the Chinese have built thousands of these systems.
And as we discussed earlier, you know, for the first time, the United States is facing two peer nuclear powers. That's the first time in our history we've had to do that. Is right? Right?
That's right.
And so when we're talking about the New START treaty and whether or not to extend it for a year, is there any incentive right now for Communist China to limit themselves in any way? Do you see is there any way that they would have an incentive to do that?
No, and in fact, we take any potential further pressure off of them if we simply extend the New START treaty for another year. We're kicking the can down the road by perpetuating a bipolar Cold War construct that makes no sense in a world where there are three peer nuclear adversaries. We need to come up with a different approach and a different formula. As I've indicated, further extending New START limitations only cripples our ability to begin to remodernize and expand our nuclear forces to meet this rising Chinese challenge.
And just to cover this again, with regard to Russia, you mentioned that they were cheating. Do we have any verification right now that Russia would be following the treaty?
Well, this is the interesting thing, is that we haven't had on-site inspections in Russia in 5+ years. Yet our confidence, we are highly confident that we know what the Russians are doing, which tells you that the on-site inspection regime associated with the New START treaty is actually not the key ingredient for our insight into what they're actually doing. Mm-hmm. It's our national capabilities that provide that insight, not the treaty.
Yeah. So what are the things that we ought to be doing with regard to getting prepared to deter two peer nuclear powers? If you're recommending don't do the New START treaty, what should we be doing?
Well, we need to start with identifying and defining our requirements. We need a nuclear posture review to be conducted. It should include the entire interagency, and it should help then drive an understanding of what we seek to achieve through negotiations with the Russians and Chinese. I think that's the place to start.
How do we get the Russians and the Chinese at the table to be able to talk about a trilateral agreement?
Well, if you give the Russians another year free of New START, you won't get them to the table for another year.
For at least another year, yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you get the Russians and the Chinese, given that the Chinese want to get to parity with us and they're going to
racing to
build,
do so.
right? They're racing to do that right now. How do you get the Chinese and the Russians to the table?
The strategy we employed in the first Trump administration was having results. I was in communication with the Chinese, although we were kind of negotiating over, future negotiations at that stage. They were clearly biding their time, but they were talking to us. What was getting to them was the diplomatic campaign that we mounted to expose what they were doing, to declassify and expose what they were doing, to get friendly foreign ministers, defense ministers, heads of state to call them out for this behavior, and to castigate the Chinese for failing to adhere to their NPT obligation to negotiate in good faith. They have that obligation under the NPT. They're not obligated to agree to anything, but they are obligated to negotiate in good faith, and China is not doing that.
In your opinion, would what we're doing to, for example, replace Amendment 3 with the Sentinel, which, again, partially based in Nebraska, is that something that we need to continue to pursue? And what's the dangers if we delay the recapitalization of our nuclear forces?
We have deferred modernization of our nuclear weapons to the point where we are now at grave risk. We have a just-in-time delivery approach to rapidly aging systems that we can't allow to slip further. So the cost overruns with Sentinel are worrying, but you can't life extend the Minuteman III past a certain point, and it's vital now that we get on with this. The capabilities that I think bother the Chinese the most, however, are the Columbia-class submarine and the B-21 bomber. Moreover, the Army's INF-type missile systems, the so-called Typhon system, clearly has the PLA's attention. And that's a conventional missile system, but it is the kind of capability that if we further fielded and proliferated, quote unquote, to friends and allies, or at least did joint deployments with them, this certainly gets the Chinese attention and it builds pressure on them to want to come to the negotiating table.
So again, and part of one of the things we do is not only recapitalize our nuclear weapon system, but then also build out our conventional capabilities. Things working, you mentioned the Typhon missile system, do joint exercises, for example, with our allies like the Philippines, to be able to, again, put pressure on the Communist Chinese to come to the table.
And perhaps not just necessarily allies. What about Vietnam?
Interesting idea. I've already run over my time. The chairman's been very gracious. Thank you, Ambassador Billingsley. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman's always gracious, Senator. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I do just want to second what Senator Kaine said regarding the concerns over the NVIDIA H200 chip transfers to China that the administration announced yesterday. These are highly advanced chips, and anybody concerned about China being able to take our technology and strengthen their military capabilities should be worried about this. In the Appropriations Committee yesterday, Senator Moran and I had a hearing with the Ambassador Greer, the trade ambassador, who said very clearly, and I agreed with him, that we should not compromise national security as part of any trade deal. This decision the administration made compromises U.S. National security, in my view, and it comes on the heels of the president waiving what was known as the affiliates rule, right? The Trump administration at the beginning of this year announced affiliates rule to close a loophole to make sure that if we transfer, we have an entities list that says let's not transfer technology to certain companies like Huawei. The affiliates rule was designed to make sure that you can't create a subsidiary, right? Huawei couldn't create a subsidiary and get around the rule. When President Trump met with President Xi in South Korea, he postponed that. They've also put off the diffusion rule, which is designed to prevent our AI and advanced chips technology that we provide to certain countries from then getting into the hands of China. So I think all of us should be very worried about the pattern we are seeing here. Thank you both for your testimony. Secretary Gott-Muller, thank you for your longtime service. Back in the 1980s, I was actually a staff member on this committee, and we worked on the INF Treaty at the time. And one of the other big issues then was the SDI initiative, Star Wars. It was Reagan's plan to create like a golden dome, as President Trump likes to call it now, that would make sure that the United States was impenetrable when it came to nuclear weapons. And after over $400 billion expended taxpayer money, it's clear that it couldn't, Star Wars, SDI couldn't meet those promises. And in fact, I think it's been well demonstrated that it's easier and cheaper for an offense to overwhelm a defense, and it creates instability. Now, part of the conversation here is about renewing the New START agreement and maybe entering into an arms control agreement with China. What is your view, Secretary Gott-Muller, of the impact of moving forward and spending a lot of money on a Golden Dome system in terms of capability, but also whether it would trigger another arms race and how it would factor into Russia and China's decisions to negotiate limits on offensive capabilities, nuclear capabilities?
Thank you, Senator Von Hollen, and it's a great pleasure to see you. I will make 2 points here. First of all, we do have a general missile proliferation problem, and we can see it in the war in Ukraine. And integrated air and missile defense is going to be critical not only for us, but for our allies. And I urge our allies in Europe and in Asia to be thinking hard about what they need to do to cope with this general proliferation of missiles in the short to intermediate ranges. Now, as to systems in the strategic ranges, we do acknowledge, and we have long acknowledged, that there is an interrelationship between strategic offense and defense, and that we have to think carefully about what is required to ensure the continuation of a reliable offensive deterrent force. And that is also a key question. So as far as Golden Dome is concerned, I will say that I am a bit concerned that we are focusing and I believe going to be investing a great deal of money in basically space-based interceptors at a time when, as we've been discussing at this morning's hearing, the Russians have produced a range of exotic systems that are not at all ballistic systems. They are exotic cruise missiles, some of them nuclear propelled or torpedoes. And the space-based interceptor layer is to go after ballistic missiles. So I'm wondering if we're missing here, once again, a major threat to the United States in terms of air-breathing systems, classic cruise missiles, and then these new Russian exotic systems that we will have to defend against. So it's a question, once again, as to how we are going to spend our scarce resources. I do believe we need to be looking at integrated air and missile defense to defend some critical targets in the United States and as well for our allies. They need to be focused on that. But whether a major kind of investment of the type that has been put forward will serve our interests going forward, I don't know. The Russians have a lead on us in terms of these exotic systems that are not ballistic in nature.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Billingsley, you just heard the talk and discuss of Golden Dome. Could I get your assessment?
Senator, one of the things we agreed on, again, in a unanimous and bipartisan way on the Strategic Posture Commission, of which we both served, was that the United States should develop and field integrated air and missile defense capabilities that can deter and defeat coercive attacks by Russia and China. And so to the extent that the Golden Dome initiative in its early increments would afford such protection, I think we should be supportive on a bipartisan basis. One other comment, when Reagan launched the Strategic Defense Initiative, right, Cray supercomputers didn't have the processing power of this iPhone. So a lot has changed since the initial vision was elaborated for a missile shield, and the technological evolution makes missile defense, particularly space-based missile defense, highly feasible at this stage. Expense is an issue, cost is an issue, but we absolutely at a minimum should agree on a bipartisan basis, as the Commission did, that we need to not be vulnerable to coercive threats by Russia or China in attacking the homeland.
So do Russia and China use this as an opportunity to just increase their production of and expand their nuclear?
No, they're already doing that. Yeah. And not only are they already doing that, they themselves are making significant investments in integrated air and missile defense capabilities. Russia has long had nuclear-tipped anti-ballistic missile interceptors in a ring surrounding Moscow. Russia has given the S-500 system a significant missile defense capability, and China is pursuing the same.
And then comparing to what we just heard from your colleague there, the different kind of weapon systems that are being devised, what's your assessment there?
I think we should be careful about feeding Vladimir Putin's ego with his bugaboo Strangelove, Skyfall, and Poseidon systems. Skyfall's already killed more Russians in its testing and development than it probably will ever harm Americans. That said, there's absolutely no reason why we should tolerate the development of these kinds of weapons. And in further discussions and dialogue with the Russians, and I worry a little bit about mimicry by the Chinese in these areas, we should make it clear in any future arms control negotiations that these kinds of capabilities need to be forsworn. Like I also mentioned earlier, any kind of missile-launched fractional orbital bombardment system of the sort that China actually tested a few years ago. These are not helpful. These are, like I said, Strange-Lovian type of capabilities.
How significant is the collaboration that we see between Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, whether it's for nuclear, whether it's for strategic missiles, or even drone capabilities? What do you see happening there?
The collaboration between the Russians and the Chinese is worrisome. In particular, I think the most significant thing that should concern us is that Russia is enabling China to obtain the fissile material necessary for its buildup. I think we should also be concerned about what Russia has been willing to furnish to the Iranians in exchange for the drones and the other systems that Iran has provided. And North Korea is a bit of a black box, in my view.
Sanctions, working, not working, working together, they all get an opportunity to try to evade sanctions?
Oh, they absolutely work to, I mean, before I was his nuclear envoy, I was President Trump's Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for sanctions. And what I would say is that sanctions do work. They can be incredibly effective, but they're not a substitute for strategy. And you also can't do sanctions piecemeal. You need to have a comprehensive approach to how you apply them, and you have to be unrelenting in enforcement.
In terms of China's AI capabilities, and we see them making advances there, is our intelligence and our collections able to keep an eye on exactly what they're doing there?
Senator, I'm not privy to current intelligence on that matter. What I would say, and we may or may not agree on this, but I don't think we arms control our way out of AI. I think we have to ensure that we maintain dominance in AI. That said, we need to be prudential in how we incorporate AI into our military systems.
And we need adequate energy in the United States to
And that leads you to small modular nuclear capability and a variety of other things.
Your opinion, the effort of the NATO countries or the commitment of them to go to 5%, how significant is that?
It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. But I would urge that the committee keep its eye on the 3.5 of the 5. The 3.5 number, that's the real hard spending on defense capabilities, but that is a big deal, and it's a big accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I had a thought I'd like to get your comments on. I had a thought for a long time that we're going to have a real problem getting China to the table until they believe they've reached parity with us. Do you both of you agree with that or disagree, Ms. Billingsley?
I think that's their plan. And that poses a real problem for us in negotiating an arms control treaty that basically puts two enemies at parity with us, at single numerical parity. That's why we went down the road in the first Trump administration of pursuing a freeze on all warhead production, because we wanted to lock the Russians in, stop the continued buildup by the Russians in their theater non-strategic capabilities, and set a framework that then we could try to stop the Chinese from tipping the apple cart over. Unfortunately, that ship may have sailed.
Ms. Gott-Miller?
I do agree, Mr. Chairman, that it's been a bear to try to get the Chinese to talk about their nuclear modernization and to try to engage on these issues. I do put a good deal of stock into President Trump's stated desire in the coming year to talk to both his Russian and Chinese counterparts about controls on nuclear weapons. It's oftentimes there has to be a breakthrough at the highest level, at the presidential level, for the governments to be willing to move forward in these discussions. And the president has stated his intention. And so I think that certainly President Xi can be in no doubt that this issue will be on the agenda for their 2 meetings in 2026.
Senator Shaheen.
Mr. Billingsley, when you were talking about both the Russian and Chinese weapons, new weapons that they've developed, you said that we should make it clear that these weapons are not acceptable. How do you propose that we make it clear that they're not acceptable, and what is this administration doing to make that point? Do you know?
On the second half of that question, I'm not privy to those discussions. I hope that...
Are you aware that anything is happening to make it clear that the weapons are not acceptable?
I believe there have been conversations. I'm excited that Dr. Yaw hopefully will be confirmed for the Arms Control Assistant Secretary before the Christmas break, because he needs to get on that mission right away, and he's a phenomenal nominee. I will say that our plan in the first administration was to incrementally extend the New START treaty and to extract concessions from the Russians at each stage. Had we been able to continue the process, even under the Biden administration, but they chose not to, a requirement for cessation of RDT&E on these destabilizing Strangelove weapons would seem to be the kind of thing we would insist on.
So you've both mentioned the importance of a nuclear posture review. I'm not aware that one is ongoing. Are either of you aware of whether that is in the works right now under this administration?
Ma'am, I am far away in California, and I'm afraid I just have not seen any indication that one is ongoing. But Mr. Billingsley might know better.
I live just down the street, and I haven't seen any indications either.
And so what are the implications for that? You talked about the importance of assessing our needs and determining what our priorities are. If we're not a year in, almost a year into this administration, and they haven't even started that kind of a review, what are the implications for having a real strategy with respect to how we address nuclear weapons and future buildup, and whether we're going to pursue any sort of arms control, and what our priorities are?
Senator Shaheen, perhaps I'll start. Mr. Billingsley went through a long list of ideas for responding to this threat, which the Strategic Posture Commission laid out in detail. If there was any criticism of the report, it was that we laid out so many priorities, and the United States of America must choose among them because of other demands. And by the way, I would like to say that one of the most important races that's going on. It's not the nuclear arms race 2.0, it's the AI race. And there are so many other areas of our national security that we have to also be investing in. And so it's going to be really important to spend smart. And for that reason, I think we can look at that long list of priorities. We can lay them out against the requirements, the threats we see and the requirements that our government lays down, and figure out what is going to be smart spending to respond to these nuclear threats now emanating from both Beijing and Moscow, the two-peer problem. But it's really going to be important for us to set our priorities carefully on the basis of requirements that will be agreed, because frankly, we have important other areas where we need to spend our defense resources, including on the conventional side. And so we really need to figure this out in a careful way.
Yeah, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and I couldn't agree more with that. That's why I'm asking the question, because it's very concerning that we don't have this kind of review underway. And I would ask both of you, do you think we are facing a nuclear threat from Latin America?
No, not currently, but I believe that the threat posed by Iranian systems in Venezuela is highly unappreciated.
Scott Miller.
I don't think we face a threat from the Latin American countries per se. What I am concerned about, and Mr. Billingsley already talked about the FOBS test of China, is that we could face a nuclear attack coming at us from the southern hemisphere, and that would be from systems deployed by Russia and China. So there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about this matter and to try to get these systems under control. The FOBS ban, I entirely agree with that idea, as well as a recommitment to a ban on nuclear weapons in space. That is part of the Outer Space Treaty, but we are all concerned that the Russians are proceeding in that direction. And so I think it's going to be very important to also think about some threats we haven't been concerned about probably since the 1970s or 80s. We have to think about now how to place a barrier in their way.
Well, I agree completely with both of you, and unfortunately, I don't think we have any sort of strategy or planning underway that would address the concerns that you raise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Really want to appreciate both of you for being here today, and this is an important subject. We spend some time on it. Our colleagues, a lot of them don't spend any time on this, and it's incredibly important for America. We really appreciate your years of service to both of you, and as I said, we don't always agree on the way to get to a point, but we pretty much agree on what the point is we need to get to, and we need to all redouble our efforts to try to get there. I'm going to leave the record open, and by the way, I will put in the record your full remarks, as both of you have requested. Important for people to have those, first of all. Secondly, for the information of the members, I will keep the record open for questions for the record until close of business tomorrow on December 11th. If you get questions, I'd appreciate it if you get answers to those questions as quickly as you could. Again, we sincerely appreciate that. With the thanks of the committee, this committee is now adjourned.